The hospital lights always buzzed louder at 2 a.m. Maybe it was the silence in the corridors or the weight of fatigue pressing down on me after 8 hours on the trauma floor. Or maybe night shifts just brought out the worst kinds of pain. But nothing could have prepared me for what came over the intercom that night. Dr. Ryan Mitchell, please report to Emergency Bay 3 immediately. Code red, multiple victims. Incoming ambulance ETA 2 minutes. I was halfway through updating a patient's chart when I heard it. I dropped the pen and bolted down the hallway, my white coat flapping behind me like some kind of cape. When I reached the trauma bay, the nurses were already scrambling. The EMTs burst through the sliding doors with 3 gurneys. 3 bodies, each one motionless, each one terrifyingly familiar. My legs locked up mid-stride. No, this can't be happening. The first gurney held Sarah, my ex-wife, her dark hair streaked with blood. The second had Jake, my younger brother, his face bruised and a deep gash across his temple. And the third, Alex, my son. My knees nearly gave out. Alex! I shouted, rushing forward. But before I could get to them, a hand grabbed my shoulder, firm but gentle. It was Dr. Torres, the attending on call. You can't go in there, he said quietly. I stared at him, wild-eyed, gasping for air. That's my son! My ex-wife and my brother are on those gurneys too. Let me through. Dr. Torres didn't budge. He looked around once, twice, then leaned in close and whispered, You can't see them yet. The police will explain everything once they arrive. My world slowed to a crawl. Outside, a siren wailed. Nurses moved in controlled chaos around me. But inside, everything went quiet. What do you mean? I whispered. Why would the police? His eyes avoided mine. And right then, I knew this wasn't just an accident. Something was deeply wrong. The cops showed up 20 minutes later. 2 officers, plainclothes, stone-faced. While my colleagues worked frantically to stabilize Sarah, Jake, and Alex, I stood frozen near the nurse's station, arms crossed tight, knuckles white, mind spinning. I hadn't been allowed into the trauma room. Not even a glimpse, not a single update about my son's condition. Alex is strong, I muttered to myself. He's only 16. He'll make it. But my gut was screaming louder than my thoughts. And the way Dr. Torres had looked at me, that downward glance, the tight mouth, the deliberate hesitation, it felt less like medical concern and more like guilt. Finally, Officer Hayes approached me, notepad already out, his expression unreadable. Dr. Mitchell, he began formally. We'd like to speak with you privately. I gestured toward the break room and led them inside, closing the door behind us. What happened? I demanded. He exchanged a glance with his partner, then started slowly. Earlier tonight, around 1:15 a.m., your ex-wife's vehicle, registered under Sarah Mitchell, was found crashed into a guardrail on County Route 7. My breath caught. That's 20 minutes from my house. He nodded. Yes. The airbags deployed. All 3 passengers were found unconscious inside. Your son was in the back seat. I leaned forward. Who was driving? Again, that glance between the officers. Hayes hesitated. We're still determining that. There's evidence suggesting your brother may have been behind the wheel. What kind of evidence? No seatbelt marks on him. Front airbags deployed on the passenger side only. Also, he paused. There were open bottles of wine in the car, several glasses, and a hotel key card wedged between the front seats. I shook my head. They were drinking? No. Jake doesn't drink, not since his DUI 5 years ago. And Sarah barely touched alcohol. Well, at least not when we were still together. My voice hardened as I remembered why our marriage ended. She cheated on me, with Jake. I'd kicked her out 6 months ago, filed for divorce, and fought tooth and nail to keep custody of Alex. Now here they were, drunk in a car with my son in the back seat. Hayes didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his jacket, a small clear bag. Inside was a cell phone. Sarah's. It wasn't locked when we recovered it, he said. I'm going to show you something, Dr. Mitchell. But I need you to brace yourself. He opened the phone and tapped the photo gallery. My heart pounded as he held up the screen. It was a selfie, Sarah in a hotel mirror, wearing nothing but a robe, Jake's arms wrapped around her waist, kissing her neck. The timestamp read 12:48 a.m., 27 minutes before the crash. I staggered back, hitting the wall. No, I whispered. No. They wouldn't. The officer's voice was low. I'm sorry. My legs almost gave out. This wasn't just some fling anymore. This was betrayal compounded by recklessness, and they dragged my son into their mess. Maybe he'd found out. Maybe he'd caught them. Maybe. The officer placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "There's more," he said softly. But I wasn't listening. That picture burned behind my eyes, and all I could think was, how long has this been going on? It wasn't the first time Sarah had betrayed me. 6 months ago, I'd come home early from a double shift, exhausted but looking forward to spending time with my family. Instead, I walked into an empty house. At first, I thought nothing of it. Sarah often took Alex to soccer practice or ran errands, but something felt off. The living room was too quiet, the air too still. I called her name, but there was no answer. Then I noticed the light spilling from beneath the closed door of our bedroom. I pushed it open, expecting to find her asleep. What I saw instead shattered me. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, her cheeks flushed. Across from her sat Jake, leaning against the dresser like he owned the place. Their faces froze when they saw me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah stammered, "Ryan, it's not what it looks like." Jake stood up quickly, hands raised. "Bro, listen." But I didn't need to hear another word. The intimacy in their body language, the way Jake's hand lingered on hers, the guilty flush on Sarah's face, told me everything I needed to know. My own flesh and blood, my brother, betraying me with the woman I loved. I lost it. I screamed through things, told them both to get out. Jake tried to apologize, but I couldn't even look at him. Sarah begged me to forgive her, claiming it was a one-time mistake, but I knew better. People don't fall into bed together without cracks forming long before. I filed for divorce the next day. Custody battles followed, ugly and messy. Sarah accused me of being emotionally distant, of working too much, of not giving her enough attention. Maybe she was right about some of it. I did work long hours, but none of that excused what she'd done. Not with Jake. Not behind my back. And now, here we were again. Only this time, they'd involved Alex. My son. My innocent, trusting boy who deserved so much better than either of them. The ICU hallway was silent. Alex had been stabilized and moved to a private room while Sarah and Jake remained in critical condition under sedation. I hadn't seen either of them. Not that I wanted to. Every second they were unconscious felt like a strange mercy. If I had to look either of them in the eye, I wasn't sure what I'd say, or do. But Alex, my son, was awake. A nurse found me pacing just outside the trauma wing. "Dr. Mitchell, he's conscious. He's asking for you." My heart leapt and sank at the same time. I pushed the door open quietly and stepped inside. There he was, pale, lips cracked, a bandage above his left brow. But his eyes, those were still my boy's eyes, alert, intelligent, burning with something he didn't know how to say. "Dad," he rasped. I rushed to his side and grabbed his hand. "I'm here, Alex. I'm here, son. You're okay now?" He looked around the room like he was still trying to convince himself this wasn't a nightmare. What happened? Why am I here?" I didn't want to overwhelm him, but I had to know. "You were in a car accident," I said carefully. "With your mom and Jake." His eyes narrowed. "I remember." His voice trailed off, lips twitching as fragments came back. "We were driving. I was yelling." "What were you yelling about?" I asked gently but firmly. He blinked. "They were kissing in the front seat. I saw it." My stomach clenched. He continued, his voice shaking now. "We were supposed to be heading home. Mom told me we were just picking up something from Jake's place, but then they stopped at a motel. She left me in the back seat for almost an hour. I thought maybe she was talking to him or something. But then..." He looked away, ashamed. I got out. I went to look through the window. They were in bed. I closed my eyes. Fury, disgust, grief, all of it boiled in my chest. I confronted them. Alex continued. I yelled, screamed, told her she was disgusting. She laughed, said I didn't understand adult love. Jake tried to calm me down, but I told him to shut up. I told him he wasn't my uncle anymore. Alex's jaw trembled. She said we needed to talk it out as a family. She made me get back in the car. Said she was sorry I found out that way. Then they started drinking. I was in the back crying, and they were drinking and talking like I wasn't even there. He swallowed hard. I begged her to stop driving. She wouldn't listen. Jake said he'd drive, but she laughed and said, "We're all a mess tonight. Might as well lean into it." The last thing I remember is the headlights. Something coming fast. Then nothing. I sat there in stunned silence. Not only had they betrayed me, but they dragged my son into their twisted, drunken fantasy. They had endangered his life, crushed his innocence, and then tried to play it off as if it were some family matter to be resolved over a bottle of wine. No, not this time. This wasn't just infidelity. This was abuse. This was reckless endangerment. This was going to end in courtrooms, ruined reputations, and jail time. I stood slowly, brushing Alex's hair from his forehead. "You're safe now," I told him. Then I walked out of the room. Fire in my chest, purpose in my steps. I had the truth. I had evidence. And I had nothing left to lose. As I stepped out of Alex's room, the hallway seemed to stretch infinitely before me, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. My mind raced with fragments of conversations, shattered trust, and the image of Sarah and Jake together in that motel room. The weight of it all pressed down on my chest like a vice, but beneath the anger and betrayal, there was something else, a cold clarity. This wasn't just about revenge or retribution, this was about protecting my son. About ensuring that no one could ever hurt him, or me, like this again. I found Officer Hayes still lingering near the nurse's station, his partner standing silently beside him. They looked up as I approached, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, I thought they might tell me more bad news, but instead, Hayes straightened slightly, his posture stiffening. "Dr. Mitchell," he began cautiously, "we need to ask you some follow-up questions." I nodded sharply, cutting him off. "Before we go any further, I want to make one thing clear. I didn't know anything about what happened tonight until you showed me those pictures and told me about the crash. Whatever Sarah and Jake were doing, wherever they were going, it had nothing to do with me. But now," I paused, letting the words hang in the air for a beat. "Now I have a lot of questions of my own." Hayes exchanged a glance with his partner, then gestured toward the same break room where we'd spoken earlier. We filed inside, the door clicking shut behind us. The space felt suffocatingly small, the stale coffee smell mingling with the tension in the room. I crossed my arms over my chest, bracing myself for whatever came next. "You said there was more," I prompted, my voice low but firm. "What aren't you telling me?" Hayes hesitated, glancing at his notepad before meeting my gaze. "We pulled surveillance footage from the motel where your ex-wife and brother stayed. It confirms they checked in around 11:30 p.m., paid cash, and left shortly after midnight. Witnesses reported hearing raised voices coming from their room during that time." "Witnesses?" I echoed, my pulse quickening. "Who?" "A housekeeper who was working the late shift saw your son storming out of the room around 12:15 a.m. She mentioned he looked upset, crying, even. She assumed it was a family argument, and didn't think much of it until later, when she heard about the accident." My jaw tightened. So someone else had seen Alex's pain. Someone else had witnessed the fallout of Sarah and Jake's recklessness, and done nothing. Anger flared in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help anyone, least of all Alex. "There's also the matter of the car itself." Hayes continued, flipping through his notes. "Preliminary reports suggest the vehicle was speeding significantly above the limit when it hit the guardrail. Tire marks indicate hard braking moments before impact, but it wasn't enough to avoid the collision." "And the alcohol?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Blood tests are pending, but the open bottles and glasses found at the scene strongly suggest impairment. If confirmed, charges will likely include DUI, child endangerment, and possibly reckless homicide depending on the outcome for all parties involved." Reckless homicide. The phrase hung heavily in the air, sending a chill down my spine. As much as I hated Sarah and Jake right now, the idea of losing them, not because of my feelings, but because of their own stupidity, was almost too much to process. And yet, part of me couldn't deny the grim satisfaction that justice might finally be served. But then there was Alex. Sweet, innocent Alex, caught in the crossfire of their selfishness. He deserved better than this. Better than them. Better than me, maybe, if I hadn't been so blind to the cracks forming in my marriage long before Jake ever entered the picture. "I need to see the full report," I said abruptly, breaking the silence. "Everything, the photos, the witness statements, the toxicology results. I want to understand exactly what happened tonight." Hayes nodded slowly. "We'll share what we can once the investigation progresses further. But Dr. Mitchell." He leaned forward, his tone shifting to something softer, almost sympathetic. "This is going to get messy. Are you prepared for that?" I met his gaze steadily, my resolve hardening. Messy doesn't scare me. Not anymore. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, legal consultations, and sleepless nights. Alex remained under observation, his physical injuries healing faster than the emotional scars. I spent every spare moment by his side, trying to piece together the fragments of our broken family while shielding him from the worst of the fallout. Social workers stopped by daily, asking careful questions about Sarah and Jake's behavior leading up to the crash. Each conversation left me feeling raw, exposed, but also determined to ensure Alex never had to endure such neglect again. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of the story. Headlines screamed about the doctor's ex-wife and brother embroiled in drunken scandal, splashing grainy photos of Sarah and Jake across tabloids and local news outlets. Friends and colleagues whispered behind my back, their pity thinly veiling judgment. Some offered condolences, others kept their distance, unsure how to navigate the wreckage of my personal life. Through it all, I held on to one truth: Alex came first. No matter what happened next, I would fight tooth and nail to protect him, from Sarah, from Jake, and from anyone else who tried to diminish his worth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, I sat with Alex in his hospital room. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady, but I knew he wasn't asleep. Gently, I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Alex," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're going to get through this. Together." He opened his eyes, staring at me for a long moment before nodding faintly. "I don't want to see them again," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "Ever." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "You won't have to. I promise." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I meant it. Whatever battles lay ahead, legal, emotional, or otherwise, I would face them head-on. Because Alex deserved a father who put him first. And I intended to be that man, no matter the cost. The weeks turned into months, each day bringing new developments that tested my resolve. The legal proceedings began in earnest, a labyrinthine nightmare of depositions, hearings, and endless paperwork. Sarah and Jake's condition stabilized enough for them to be moved out of intensive care, though either woke from their comas immediately. When they finally did, the police were waiting with handcuffs and charges. DUI, child endangerment, reckless driving, the list went on. But beyond the criminal case, I filed for full custody of Alex, determined to sever any remaining ties between him and the people who had betrayed us both. Alex grew quieter as the trial approached. He spent most of his time in his room or sitting by the window, staring out at the world like it was something foreign he no longer recognized. I tried to engage him, asking about school, encouraging him to talk about his feelings, but he often shrugged me off, retreating further into himself. It broke my heart to see him this way, but I understood. How could he trust anyone after what Sarah and Jake had done? How could he believe love wasn't just another word for betrayal? One evening, as we sat together in silence, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of pushing him to open up, I shared a piece of myself. "You know," I said softly, glancing at him from the corner of my eye, "I used to think being a good dad meant working hard and providing for you. That if I gave you everything you needed materially, you'd be okay." He looked over at me, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "And now? Now I realize I got it wrong," I admitted, my voice thick with regret. "Being a good dad isn't just about giving you things, it's about listening. Being there. Protecting you, not just from the outside world, but from the people who are supposed to love you most. Including me." For the first time in weeks, Alex smiled, a small, hesitant curve of his lips, but it was enough. Enough to remind me why I was fighting so hard. Why I couldn't give up, not even when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. The courtroom was cold and sterile, its polished wood and high ceilings doing little to mask the tension in the air. Reporters packed the benches, cameras flashing as Sarah and Jake were led in, handcuffed and pale. They avoided looking at me, their faces etched with shame, or maybe fear. I didn't care which. All I cared about was the verdict. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The prosecutor stood, laying out the evidence, the motel surveillance footage, the toxicology reports confirming alcohol levels far above the legal limit, the testimony from witnesses who saw Alex fleeing the scene in tears. My stomach churned as the details unfolded, each one a fresh wound reopening old scars. Then it was my turn to testify. As I took the stand, I felt every pair of eyes in the room boring into me. The defense attorney tried to paint me as an absentee father, someone too consumed by work to notice the cracks forming in my marriage. But I held steady, my voice firm as I recounted the events leading up to the crash, and the years before it, when Sarah and Jake's betrayal began. I wasn't perfect. I admitted, meeting the jury's gaze. But I never stopped loving my son. And I never will. By the time I stepped down, I could feel the tide turning. The jury deliberated for hours, the wait stretching endlessly as Alex and I sat side by side, gripping each other's hands tightly. Finally, the foreman returned, holding the verdict slip aloft. "Guilty on all counts," he announced, his voice ringing through the courtroom. A wave of relief washed over me, followed quickly by anger. Guilty. Of course they were guilty. Hadn't Alex suffered enough already? Hadn't I? Sarah and Jake were sentenced to prison terms, 5 years each, with mandatory counseling and rehabilitation programs. Custody of Alex was awarded to me outright, with supervised visitation rights granted only after extensive psychological evaluations. It wasn't justice, not really. Not for the pain they'd caused. But it was closure, and for now, that would have to be enough. Months later, life began to settle into a fragile sort of normalcy. Alex started seeing a therapist, slowly unpacking the trauma of that night and the years leading up to it. He joined a soccer team, made friends, and even laughed again. Watching him heal was the greatest gift I'd ever received, proof that we could rise from the ashes stronger than before. As for me, I threw myself into my work, channeling my anger and grief into helping others. Trauma surgery became more than just a job, it became a calling. Every patient who walked through those doors reminded me of how fragile life was, and how precious. One evening, as Alex and I sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me unexpectedly. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant but clear, "do you think Mom and Jake will ever change?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "People can change, Alex, but only if they want to. Whether they do or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're safe now. You're loved. And nothing they did changes that." He nodded, leaning his head against my shoulder. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from surviving. From knowing that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to rebuild, to start anew. And so, we moved forward, together. Not unscathed, but undefeated. Because sometimes, survival is the sweetest victory of all.